Hi everyone. So I wanted to provide you with a free tutorial. This tutorial is available on my YouTube channel and also on my Patreon account. So this is a very small tutorial of a Spaniel's ear. So drawing fur and drawing long fur is one of the things that people often find quite challenging when they start drawing pastels. So I wanted to just give an introduction tutorial to doing this. So it's not a hugely detailed piece of work, but it does cover things like layering and tonal ranges and things like that, and it's not huge. You can see it's not a huge tutorial, but I thought it might whet the appetite and get you interested in drawing pastels, and also for you to introduce you to my teaching style, and I just hope you enjoy it. So it's available, and just let me know what you think. Enjoy, take care, bye. So let's get started. So this is a Spaniel's ear. So I've drawn it out on sand pastel mat. Now I have drawn this out in black. I don't normally draw an outline in black, but I thought it'd be easier for you to see in black on the pastel mat because it is quite pale if you draw it out in white. So I've drawn it out very, very lightly, so I don't want to make too much indentation with the black because obviously there are some quite light colours on this. So I'm going over it with my putty eraser just to push back the outline to make sure that I know where everything is. I've got a really sort of broad idea of where everything is before I start. And I'm going to be using pan pastels to start with as an underlayer with this one, and then I'm going to build up the layers to get that real sort of fluffy texture and the feeling of air on the in the ear, because obviously you have air under thick fur, which gives it the impression that there's lots of different layers of fur. So we'll start off with the underlayers in pan pastel. You don't have to use pan pastel. You could use pastel pencils if you haven't got pan pastel, or you could use soft pastels. It's a personal preference really, but for speed, pan pastels are quite good to get those layers down. They're not too thick and you can work over the top in pencil. So we'll crack on and I'll explain my process as I go through. So I'm going to start with the very darkest areas first. So I'm using a little cotton bud and I've got the darkest brown on here, and I'm going to start laying that down in areas where I think that area is going to be showing through the most. So at this stage I'm not going for accuracy, I'm just going for an idea of where I think things might be. I can go off and refine or change or alter all of this later on, but at the moment I'm just trying to get the flow of the direction of the fur and also getting the sort of the darkest areas sort of mapped in, because it's quite important that you sort of have an idea of where everything is before you start to put your top layers on. Don't worry, as I say, about putting too much pigment on at this stage, because it doesn't really matter. Really what I'm doing is laying very light layers, I suppose, of pigment at this stage, because again I'm just trying to make sense of where I'm putting everything. So I'm kind of in my head as I'm doing this, I'm not thinking about fur. As you know, if you've watched any of my tutorials before, you will know that I don't label things when I'm working, because I find that just confuses my brain. If I tell my brain I'm drawing an ear or an eye or whatever, your brain has this ability to think, oh, I know what an ear or an eye looks like, and then you start to draw the things that you think you see rather than the things that you are actually seeing. So for me, it's much more helpful to not label things at all at this stage. So as I say, it's not going to be accurate and it's going to look a complete dog's breakfast. It really will at this stage. So don't worry when you're starting to do this, because you'll start to do this and you'll think, gosh, this looks such a mess. What am I going to do? How am I going to sort this out? So, you know, we say trust the process, but the process is trusting yourself and trusting your abilities. So it doesn't, you know, what's the worst that can happen? That's the way to look at it. What's the worst that can happen? If it doesn't work out, you could do another one. You know, it's not the end of the world. And you're not going to learn unless you try things, because sometimes you can watch as many tutorials as you like and you can watch other people do it and think, oh, I could do that. And then when you come to do it, it's really difficult. And that's because you can watch something, but actually learning is by doing rather than watching. Yes, it's important to watch somebody do something, but the only way you're going to learn how to do the things that you want to do and to really get better at them is to just dive in, give it a go and see where it takes you and enjoy it. That's the whole idea of it. You know, art shouldn't be a painful process. It can be. You know, there are days when, you know, I get as frustrated as anybody else when I'm working on my work. But, you know, I also think, well, I'm learning as I go along, and it's all going to come together. It'll all come right, and, you know, it'll sort itself out. So, as I say, I'm following the photo loosely. I'm not following it accurately, I would say. You know, I'm not going to try and be a human printer and paint an exact replica of this photo. What I want is to get a feeling of fur. You know, I want to get the feeling that this spaniel has got a lovely soft fur-like ear, and I want to get those that feel in that fur. So that's kind of where I'm heading at the moment. So I'm not going to spend too much time worrying about too much accuracy. I will put the eye in because I think the eye kind of anchors the whole drawing, so I will put the eye in, and actually it will be quite a nice little project to do the eye. Normally I'd start with the eye first, but because the focus of this is the ear, I think that's where we need to spend most of our energy on scoping this out. So that's the first layer of dark gone in, and it looks a complete mess. Don't worry, it'll sort itself out. Got the darkest areas. I'm going to go in with the lighter pan pastel. So I'm going to go in with this very light colour here, just to pick out some of those highlights. And again, this is not going to be completely accurate. This is just going to give an idea of where the lightest areas are going to be, and then we can go over again and really refine this at a later stage. So this is about picking out those really light areas. I'm not putting huge amounts of pigment on here again. I'm just sort of laying a few sort of strokes down to try and get a feel of where we've got sort of a bit of movement, and where the light's hitting the sort of lightest areas here. So again, don't worry about accuracy, don't worry that it's going to look 100%, it won't. And this is why a lot of people give up, I think. I think a lot of people, especially with pan pastel, when you start to put it down, because it doesn't go down smoothly, it's really can be a bit clumpy in places, and then people can get a bit disillusioned with it, especially when you look at it like this and you think it's never ever going to look how I want it to be. So don't worry about it, just go for it, be brave, grit your teeth, go in and just put those colours down. So just try and imagine the flow of where the fur is going. So fur, it doesn't go in one direction, and it doesn't, it's not like sort of picket fencing. So, you know, make it so that it looks a bit untidy in places, and that you've just got the general movement. So you're not trying to do the detail at this stage. You're just trying to get a feel of where the flow of those hairs are, so that you've got that kind of that movement. A bit like if you're painting sea, I guess, or something like that. You have the movement and the flow of the waves. It's the same with fur. Fur has got really, especially long bouncy fur, that's got a kind of a lovely sort of flow about it, and also the direction of the body of the fur where it's laying is really important to understand a little bit of the anatomy of how fur lies across the body of an animal as well. So we're getting a little bit of bit more structure to this now. So it's starting to, I can see what's happening. I'm sure you're probably looking at this and thinking, earth is that looks terrible, and it does. And it's one of the reasons I think a lot of artists don't like sharing their process, because when you're working like this, it's a bit like if you're sketching in public, and I've done that a few times, and I usually do it now with my back against the wall, because you get members of the public and they'll walk up and they'll look at it and they'll, it doesn't look anything like what you're supposed to be drawing. And that's because you're in that sort of early stage of process. But I think people just expect it to look, we're not miracle makers. We're finding our way. We're thinking. We're constructing in our brains what we're seeing, and everybody sees things differently. So what I see and what you see may be different. So but that's the uniqueness of art, and that's why it's so special. And you can get a whole room of people to draw the same animal or the same building or the same still life, and everybody will come up with a different interpretation, and that is the magic of art. So we've gone and done our second layer, so we're going to move on to our mid-tone now, and it'll start to build the structure. Moving on to the mid-tone, this is a much sort of warmer colour, and this will start to make it pop, really. We'll start to see the structure of this dog starting to come to life. I think it's really important whenever you're choosing colours for any painting, the rule is that you should have a really good range of tones, so a really good dark tone, a really good light tone, and a really good mid-tone. And the rule is that one of the tones should really be the dominant, and one should be not so prominent, because it's like music. If you've got a range of different notes in a piece of music, it's not monotone, it's monotony that makes things boring. So I think one of the things I always do when I'm drawing is I always convert things into black and white, especially when I've finished, to really just check that I've got a good range of tonal values in there. And black and white is a really good measure to do that with, because obviously it enables you to see where your tonal values really lie, and then you can start to really work with them. So again, now I'm referring to the photograph a bit more now, and I'm trying to really sort of build up where the movement is. So some of it I've not got in the right places, so I'm starting to try and refine that a little bit more now with this mid-tone. And again, I'm going to go back and do some more refining as I go along. But it's starting to blend everything together at this stage, so it's starting to, there's a bit more cohesion to the whole piece, because obviously we've got rid of the background colour mostly now, so we can then really start to hone in and see a bit more of where that detail needs to be. Now at this stage, as I say, I'm really still painting very loosely. I'm not doing a lot of detailed work. I'm not doing a lot of refinement. I'm still feeling my way through, and I'm going to blend a lot of this and then go back over areas sort of in sections in a minute. But I wanted to sort of, gives you a very painterly effect, and it sort of gives you the structure of the picture. You've got that sort of bare bones of it, if you like. Fur is quite challenging to paint realistic fur. It takes a lot of patience, and although people think you're painting every single hair, you're really not. Even my work, I know people think, they say, oh, you know, you've got a lot of patience, you paint every single hair. I do paint a lot of hair, obviously. I don't paint every hair. I mean, even I would get bored with that. So I think it is really important to understand how tone and you know, having good tonal value gives much more effect to realism than actually detail. Detail doesn't give realism, tonal values give realism. So that's why it's so important to do that. So now I've done all of this, what I'm going to do is quite random. I'm going to just start to rub all of this in. So I'm just going to push that pigment right into the paper. So I'm smudging in, it's fine, worry about it, it's all has a plan. So if you have got something that looks as messy as that, you're on the right tracks. So now I'm going to go back in and refine it even a bit more with the light pan pastel. I want to really pick out this area up here where there's quite a lot of highlights, and this will be the area where the focus really will be on that. So I really want to make sure that I retain that really light area up here, because that's where the light's really hitting, and then we can go back in and start to refine in more detail the bits above this area, so that we can start to get some of those darks in. So just going to go around here. So again, I'm trying not to focus on the detail too much at this stage. Just trying to probably pick out, I'd say, a little bit more of some of the individual more dominant strands of hair, I'd say, at this stage, just because they are going to be a bit brighter and make everything pop a little bit as we go further down with the detail. So just a little bit now more down here, and then these areas across here, there's a bit comes down across here. So pan pastel can you know, especially if you're putting it on with one of these sort of makeup applicators. I like the makeup applicators. I think that they work really well with pan pastel. They do work well for me, and they're a lot cheaper than the soft tools. The soft tools are good as well, so it's just really personal preference. But when you go through as many as I go through, it doesn't feel quite so wasteful when I'm having to dispose of quite so many, whereas the soft tools, as I say, they're quite expensive. So I tend to use these because of the economy of them. You can get a lot of soft tools for not a lot of makeup applicators for not a lot of money. I did have some really great ones with long handles, but I can't seem to be able to source those anymore, which is a shame. So again, I'm just trying to pick out the highlighting areas, and I will go back over and rub some of this in. Don't worry about the dust. It doesn't really matter at this stage about the dust. I do tend to blow the dust off, but you've got to be careful with pastel dust, that you're not blowing too much around. I don't, you know, I think if you've got breathing problems or asthma or anything like that, I think you've got to be a lot more careful with pastel. But in the grand scheme of things, there's a lot more things in life that are dangerous than pastels. I think as long as you're just sensible and just keep your studio as clean as possible, then I think that's absolutely fine. Okay, so we've got that nice sort of area of light. I might go up here a little bit more. I think there's probably a few more strands here that I've missed out, gone a bit, and that's why it's really important to, you know, keep referring to your reference image and make sure that, you know, it has some sort of value. You don't have to be completely slavish to it, especially if you're drawing hair and if you're drawing pet portraits and things like that. As long as you get the right colour and the right expression on the animal, then I think, you know, it doesn't really matter how the hair, you know, unless there's something really, some dogs have got, you know, very distinctive markings or very distinctive little top knots or things like that. And I think that's really important to capture those things. But if it's just, you know, ear, hair and things like that, I think you can get away with more of that. But I think it, you know, if I think if you're drawing a pet portrait too, especially if it's a dog that's got it's a brown dog or it's an unusual colour, get quite a few different photos because the light changes on photos, so you can end up painting a picture that you're really pleased with, and then the owner will say, well, my dog's not that colour, my dog's a different colour. So make sure that you talk to the owner that you're doing the pet portrait of to make sure that you're getting an accurate representation of the dog's colour, because that's going to be one of the most important things if you're doing a portrait. So you can see that I've now got quite an area of light here, and it's going to kind of be a bit darker down here. So we're going to start to do some more refining on this now. Now I'm going to go back in with the darker pan pastel. So this area down the bottom here is quite dark. So I'm going to start to bring some of this heavier shadow down here. Just start to build some of the areas down the bottom where you've got some of those curls around the bottom of the ears. And I'm going to put a little bit of that mid-tone in there as well, to try and sort of make sense of, I guess I'm making sense of where I'm seeing this area here that I kind of, it's not exactly as it should have been on the photo. So as I say, I'm trying to refine it to get it how I want it to look. So don't be afraid to go back in, work over things. That's why we don't put huge amounts of detail down early on, because we're going to go back in, we're going to refine, we're going to work over it, we're going to think about what works, what doesn't work. And I think it's important as well that you see me doing this, because there's always this sort of feeling, I guess, when you're watching somebody on social media and you see a finished piece of work and people go, oh, you know, that's great, that's fantastic, but they don't see the struggle that goes on behind the scenes. They just see the ta-da moment, and you know, and I think you know, that whether it takes some of the magic away if you see the struggle, I don't know, but I think most artists do struggle when they're drawing, because it is a a pushing and pulling of light and dark, light and dark, light and dark. Does this work? Does that not work? Does that need to be darker? Does that need to be lighter? There's all this sort of narrative that's going on inside my head as I'm doing it. And so even though you've got an outline there, it's not colouring in. And people think sometimes because you've got an outline, it's colouring in. It certainly is not colouring in. It's much more complicated than that, especially if you're wanting to get that level of realism and that level of detail that you're going to be happy with at the end of it. So you can see that I'm going around, I'm refining, I'm making decisions about where I'm going to put the light and the dark as I go. I'm trying to keep this area up here as unpolluted as I can at this stage, because this area is quite light, and so I want to retain that, because that is going to be really the focus of the picture. So I'm pushing a little bit harder with the dark areas at the moment around that, so that I can make that pop a little bit more when I start to refine the details of that. So I'm just going down here and just refining some of this dark area here. And this is the beauty of pastel matte. It is so forgiving. You can do so much with it to get, the levels of detail that you're really trying to create. It is quite magical paper to work on, really, in that respect. I haven't found anything that I like as much as pastel matte, and I've tried other things, but I always come back to it because it just has that quality of being able to really push those layers of detail that you want to do. So I'm getting a little bit sort of muddled with this area down here. So I'm just going to blend these down to give me a bit more tooth on the paper, so that when I come back I've got a bit more to work with still down here. And I'm just going to warm these darker areas up a little bit as well. So this is what is often referred to as the ugly stage of a painting. And most of my paintings spend a huge amount of time in the ugly stage. But as your confidence grows, as you become more used to trusting yourself and trusting your abilities, this stage won't frighten you. To start with, it can be very off-putting and quite scary for a lot of people, and this is usually the time when people give up and they throw it in the bin and go, I can't do that, it's too hard, can't do it. So I'm just going to go in with some light areas again, and if you get over that and you go, yeah, I can do this, it's that voice in your head. If you can shut that voice up and go, I've got this, it's difficult, but I'm gonna work through it. I'm gonna sort it out, and I'm gonna really work through it. Then the rewards of being able to create work that you're so proud of is immense, and it gives you that little dopamine hit that you'll want to keep going back and then getting better and getting better and getting better. But you won't do it unless you give yourself permission to try and try and try and keep trying. That's the key to anything, isn't it? Of getting better at anything is giving yourself permission to try, and not have somebody come in and go, oh, that doesn't look very good, like they do when you're sketching. That's why I don't sketch anymore in public. or I usually put earphones in or a hat or something if I'm sketching in public now. I'm quite shy anyway. I am quite shy really. I love talking to people about art. I really do love talking to people about art. So you can see that I'm starting to really, I'm probably spending a bit more time now on various areas and getting more detail, because I'm starting to refine this area in a lot more detail now, because I want to start building up these layers. And I'm just going to gently blow some of that off there, very gently. This is a camera cleaner for lenses. It's very good for just blowing the dust off, but don't blow hard because you don't want to be inhaling that dust at all. I'm going to carry on. I'm going to go up to the top here and start to refine a lot more of this area up here as well. This will all become a lot more, make a lot more sense when we start to go in with the pencils on the top. But I try and hold off doing that as long as I possibly can, because the more of the sort of base layers you've got down, the more information you've got to work with will help enormously when you start to come back to it with your pencils. And the pencils, it takes longer. For me, the pencils is the part I enjoy the most, I suppose, because I really enjoy drawing. But this is more painterly, I'd say. So I guess this is why they call it pastel painting, because this feels much more like painting. It's much more intuitive, like painting. And the way that I'm putting the pastel down using this applicator is a bit more like I would use a paintbrush, I suppose. So I think pastel does cross over really nicely with painting and drawing. For me, drawing is probably my strongest skill, but I do like painting as well. So for me, pastels is the perfect combination, and I just really love the effects that you can get, because you can get those really lovely soft painterly effects, but you can also get that hyper detail that you could get with pencil as well. So and you can cover obviously much larger areas than you can with pencil. So if you were drawing in coloured pencil, this, to get to this stage, would take you probably 2-3 times longer. And yeah, and also you can go light over dark as well with pastels, which is very difficult with coloured pencils. So coloured pencils probably a bit more like watercolour painting in the way that you're building up your painting, I suppose. But it's what your preference is, and you only you know what you prefer to do. If you're a real details person, then the pastel pencils will probably be much more fun to work with than the actual pastel sticks and the pan pastels. And you don't need to have pastel sticks, pan pastels. You don't need to have all of these things. But if you get the pastel bug, you probably will want to try these things just to see how you go and to see what effects that you can achieve with them. So you can see that I'm really starting to build these layers now, and it's really starting to have much more of a refinement about it. And again, I'm still not putting in huge amounts of detail at this stage. I'm still putting in quite sort of expressive, but a bit more refined, I'd say, a bit more considered in where I'm putting my marks now. Still trying to follow the photograph, but not slavishly following every hair and every detail. I'm just trying to pull out those big chunks of colour that I can see, so that I'm getting some accuracy in there. Okay, I'm going to just again gently blow away some of that dust. and I'm going to go over it again. I'm just going to very lightly rub in this pigment, because pastel matte is, because it's so amazing, it enables you to be able to put in so many different layers. So the more you push the pigment into the paper, as long as you haven't filled the tooth of the paper, you can keep working and keep adding layers and layers and layers. It's, as I say, fairly impressive stuff, pastel matte. So now I'm going to go in and I'm just going to start to pull out some of these really bright highlights, just so that I've got those areas where it's the real brightest. And you can see that it's starting to look almost, you know, like there's a bit of depth in here already. And that's just that mixture of light and dark, and that mid-tone that we captured in there. So we'll go back in and we'll just put a bit more of that in there in a minute, so that we just really refine those dark and light areas, and then we can start to add the detail on top of that. So just going to put a few more bits here. Okay. So now I'm going to go back and really push a little bit harder with the dark area. So I'm just going to use a slightly darker brown, just to really capture these areas down here. I really want those to look even darker than we've got on the bottom at the moment. So just in a very lightly in some of the really dark areas, where this is where you've got a lot of depth in the fur. Just want to capture those bits and get some of those nice curly bits in there. And then this bit here. I'm just going to put a bit of that mid-tone in there as well. Some of these areas, when we go in and start doing our details, so some of the areas will have softer edges and not so much detail, and some of it will be a bit more refined. It depends how detailed we want to push it, and you can always, you know, change your mind as you're going along, and there's sort of little conversations that are going on in your head the whole time. Is often where you make those final decisions as you're going along, as you finish. So I'm just finishing some of these areas with a bit more mid-tone. Fur is one of those things that you could noodle away at it for hours, and you could overwork it, and I think it is really important to take some time away from a painting, especially when it's very detailed painting, and sometimes look at it in a mirror. So when because you're so focused on what you're doing, it is really easy to become over focused on a certain area, and that's where ruination of a work can easily happen. So very often I'll have a break, I'll go off and I'll take Sybil for a walk or do something different, and then come back to it with a fresh pair of eyes. I think that especially if you're working on an area that is really super detailed, it's good. Even go and have a cup of tea, you know. It's can really give you that sense of distance, so that you can then work through in a much more refreshed way. So okay, I think what we're going to do now is we're going to do the eye, and then we can start to build up this area around here and start to build this area of detail. So focusing on the eye, and then we can really start to refine and finish the spaniel's ear. Moving on to the ear, so I'm now going to go in with my pastel pencils. So I'm just going to just roughly scope out the outline of this, so that I can start to build up the layers around it. Again, just very loosely laying in details, well, not details, but just the blocks of colour really at this stage. I don't really want the details at this stage because I'm still just trying to map it out, and then just making sure that the pupil's in where I need it to be. I tend to work quite loosely with eyes initially, because eyes have got lots of different colours in them, so I try to build up those layers very gradually, and sort of quite calmly, I would say, because I don't want to. Just going to put the highlight in. I'm using a blue, but I will pare that back a little bit later. I'm just going to put a bit of blue around here to start with. And again, the blue really makes the oranges of the eye pop. So very often people put catch lights in, they always use sort of browns, but very often they're not browns, they're greys or blues. So I'm just very lightly putting in just the brown colour, and blend it with one of my little tiny cotton buds here, just to push the pigment in and get rid of the background colour of the paper. So I'm going to go back in with the black, and I'm going to start to press down a little bit more now. Don't tend to press until I'm confident that I've got things in the right place, because it's much harder to correct if you've pushed a lot of pigment into the pastel mat and then you need to correct over it. So I tend to really start to go in with a bit more conviction once I'm happy that I've got things in the right place and it's starting to look how I want it to look. So what's going to really make this eye pop is a bit of orange. So I'm just going to start to put a little bit of orange in there. Like this. Again, that's too bright, so we should push that back some more. Over the top with brown, a warmer brown. go back in with black. So just push colour back so it isn't quite so sharp. Let's go over the top of the blue, and then just go over with a white a little bit just to pull out some of that. Okay. And then just go in with here with this sort of violet colour, Payne's grey rather, and just start to refine the area around the pupil. Now I'm going to just make this pupil a little bit rounder. So I'm going to go back in with my little trusty cotton bud again. Just darken up those areas. Darken all of the areas around the eye. And then we just need the little bit of white just to pull out some of the fleshy bits around here, and then some of the fleshy bits that make the eye look moist around here. So we will go back and we'll refine a lot more of this when we come to do all the hair around the eye, but you kind of get the impression that, you know, we've got this eye, nice soft eye. This dog's got, it's got really, I think Spaniels always have nice soft eyes. And getting the expression correct in an eye is part of the magic, I think, of drawing a really effective portrait of any animal. So I think that some animals have got much more intense stare of their eye than other animals have. So like big cats particularly have got quite intense eyes, and well, they're looking for their next meal usually, I think. So I'm just going to, again, I'm just going to blend. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a normal cotton bud, it's a bit softer, to get some softness around here. This is a sand pastel matte, and it is quite grainy actually. Some of the pastel mattes tend to be more grainy than others. It's not a problem, it's not an issue, I don't find it a particular issue, and if you're used to working on sort of sandpaper, then it's probably very similar, but it can be a little bit harder with some of the finer details on some of the grainier pastel mattes. So I tend to work with quite sharp pencils anyway, but yeah, again, it comes down to personal preference and what your working style is really, and what suits your technique. So I'm just going to go and just refine again around here a little bit, this eye, and I'm just going to and then I'm going to just go in with this blue just to make it pop a little bit under the eye. blue is a really good colour for making oranges and portraits where you've got an orange animal. It's a really nice way to make, you know, the complementary colour under the eye, and it's so much nicer than just using a flat grey or something like that. You don't want to do too much, you don't want it to be too overkill, but it can give a nice pop to your work. And when we come to do this fur underneath, it will really start to make that look so much brighter under there. So we've got now this area around here. I'm just going to refine that a little bit more with pan pastel before we move on to the detail area. So I'm just going to pull this area out a little bit further. I think that hair comes out a little bit further on the actual portrait. So we've got there. So we've got a situation now where we've got all of the information scoped in, and we can really start to now refine the portrait in a lot more detail now. So it's taken quite a while to get to this point. I'm just putting the highlights on the face now. So you can see how you've had to hold back from putting the detail in, and you know, I am a detailed person, so you can see even if the way that I work is even much slower than just going straight in with the detail, and holding yourself back from putting the detail in too quickly will definitely enable you to draw much more realistic animals as you go forward. So I'm just going to very lightly just get rid of that excess dust, and I'm just going to then go and just push in finally that layer of pigment all across this, and we are now ready to start to refine and go in with our pastel pencils. So I'm going to start refining some of this detail now. Now I'm going to use a Caran d'Ache pencil. This is a 408. So Caran d'Ache, you do the best range of browns, I would say, dark browns in pastel pencils. The ones in the Carbothello ones they're okay, but they're not as dark as the Caran d'Ache ones. So although I don't use outlines as such, I am just going to go along the edge of this light fur here, just because I want to make this area here quite dark. This is where the deepest shadow is, as the light hair is sitting over the top. So at the moment I'm just putting the hair in the direction of travel on the face. So I'm just going over and just kind of putting very light strokes in this area here, just to darken this piece up here. I do like Caran d'Ache. They've got a really sort of silky smooth feel to them. They are really lovely pencils, but they are quite expensive. So if you're not sure whether you're going to like them or not, probably best to just buy a couple and try them. There's different reviews online regarding them. Some artists absolutely love them and swear by them, and some not so much. So they can be a bit grainy in places, but I've never really found that to be an issue, to be honest. I love the colour range that they have, and they are one of my go-to pencils, especially for the darker browns, as I say, because I haven't found any pastel pencils that can kind of meet that criteria as well as the Caran d'Ache. Although Spaniel Ear have just brought out a range of pastel pencils, which are woodless pastel pencils, and I have a couple of those and I'm really impressed with those as well so far. So if you like pencils, just try different varieties, see what works for you, and see what results you can get with them. But you're only going to know by playing and actually trying what works for you, really. So I'm just putting in here the areas where I can see the absolute darkest pigment is there. So where I'm going along here, I'm just following the fur, the direction of travel, but when it goes into sort of the these bits here, you can just kind of just put a hint of a line in there. So I'm just starting to add a bit more detail at this stage, not too much, because I'm wanting to go in and refine. So I'm going to start bringing in some different colours now. So I'm going to start with a warmer brown, just so where these go behind other colours, bits of fur, that's where your sort of warmer colours would sit. So, and if you think about it, the closer it is to you, that's where your lightest areas will be, and then the further away, that's where the darkest colours will sit. So I'm going to use a more of a sand brown here. And again, I am referring to the photo, but I'm not slavishly copying it. What I'm doing is trying to get a feel of that flow, that fluidity of the fur as it goes through all of these different transitions of up and down around these areas. And because we've got those nice lighter layers on there, it will be easier to put some lighter areas as we go through that and start to build the detail with that. There aren't any quick fixes, especially to the way that I work. So I can only teach you how I work and what works for me. But you will start to learn your own way of doing things and your own techniques, and if you take some of my techniques and apply some of the learning to that and put some of your own take on it, then I think that's how we all develop, really. So I'm just trying to build some of these darker areas now. And I don't want hard edges, so I'm trying to avoid where I have got those hard edges. I'm going over and I'm just softening those areas up, because I don't really want those to look hard. And again, fur is messy. It doesn't follow the right structures that you would, it can go in all kinds of different directions. So don't be afraid to experiment and to try different things about how you feel that the fur is going to look on this ear. So there's no right or wrong. There's whatever you do is going to look great, I'm sure. So I'm just doing some wispy sort of hair, because hair does fall all over the place. So lots of pushing and pulling of pigment and colours at this stage, and there'll be a lot of refining going on as we go through this. So I'm just using these 3 different browns to start to make sense of the hair. And then I'm just going to go back in and just start to pull out some of these highlights. And what we'll do is we will be going back over this with some lighter highlights as well as we build this up. So at this stage, again, try not to put too much pigment down if you can possibly avoid it. We want some tooth left in the paper to help us with those final layers. So again, the more that you put down, the harder it will be in this sort of layer. It will be harder to really refine. So you can go over and push some of that pigment in, and then it gives you a bit more tooth to work with. And this is where the beauty of pastel really comes into its own, because you can start to put these lighter layers over the top. And what I'm doing now is I'm doing a bit more ad hoc to try and refine some of these areas here without looking so sculpted, I suppose. And you start to get into a flow of doing this, so you're almost doing it intuitively without really thinking too deeply about what you're doing. It just starts to take a life of its own really when you're working in this sort of section. And I find it quite therapeutic actually. I find that when I'm doing fur, I can get completely lost in the flow of it. So I think that's the beauty of it really, that you can really get completely lost in the enjoyment of doing it. But if you start to overthink it and start to think, and have these voices in your head going, oh, that doesn't look right, or I've made a mistake here, then that can be quite crippling. So I would try and avoid that inner voice, that inner critic, and just go, I've got this, I'm going to make this work. It's going to be fine. It will be fine. I'm going to go down to this darker area down the bottom here, because we want to make sure that we've got our shadows in the right area. So we've got this lighter area at the top, so we can start to build that refinement in. This, as I say, this paper is quite grainy, so it's good because there's a lot of tooth in it, and it's taking quite a lot of layers, but it also needs smoothing out, otherwise it gives it a really sort of grainy effect, which isn't as attractive and not what my work normally looks like. So I'm trying to smooth it as I go. I do tend to work quite intuitively with my hands, and not everybody likes to do that, so wear gloves if it's something that you don't like doing. I never have beautiful nails, I would say that, because I've usually either got paint or pastel on my nails, so I have to remember if I'm going shopping at lunchtime to otherwise I look kind of green or something horrible, so it's not a great look. So people do notice your hands actually, so I always notice when people have got really beautiful nail varnish on or whatever, but always a bit jealous that mine never look like that. So right, so with this area here, I'm going to start to I'm pulling some of these areas down here, and I'm going to start to pull these down over some of this darker pigment as well. And I'm just kind of following the flow of where it goes. So this is where your highlights are hitting. As I say, you know, people think that you draw every single hair, but when you're actually doing this, you can see that you're actually almost working in clumps. So you're not, yes, you are putting hair down, but you're not slavishly putting every single little hair in. You're trying to give the impression of where the hair is, and then you're sort of building those layers up. So, and this is where you've got your sort of shadows. This is quite a complicated ear, this. It's got a lot going on. So it's a good one to start with, but it's also, if you do this, I think you'll be very proud with the results that you get, and it will give you a lot of confidence. So when you start to work on a smaller ear or an area where it's not quite so detailed, all of the techniques that you'll have learned in this will be transferable into something a lot more a lot smaller, so that you'll be able to really build your confidence with that. So this area here, it's just quite clumpy here, so I'm just going to just pull in some shadows in here. Not huge amounts, just a hint of where the hair separates, really. And just blend that down. Okay. I'm just going to bring in a little bit more pigment of the sort of midden lighter colour browns in here, because I'm trying to push back some of this area now that's not as prominent as this bit up here at the top. So I kind of just want to push back some of this area, mute it a little bit, because I don't want it to be quite as dominant in the main picture. So I'm just going to mute some of this down here. And you're probably looking at this and thinking, gosh, well, you know, we put all of that pigment on, and now we're sort of covering it up. We put all the light colours on, and now we're covering it up. But this is part of what building those layers, I suppose, is that you're, learning as you go. And so I'm just going to start to put some of this lighter area down here. And you don't know until you start to come in with some of your really light lights where you've got to push back with some of your really dark highlights. So sometimes you have to, it's a bit trial and error, I'd say, in some of the areas that you're working on, to just kind of get the effects that you're looking for. So you can see that there are some sort of lost bits of detail. So I'm not drawing every bit of detail. I'm drawing in areas where it would recede. I'm not putting huge amounts of detail in those areas because I don't want it to look too forced. And I'm blending and softening as I go because I want to make it look like soft fur. I don't want it to look with harshness. And then starting to go over in different directions, and I'm following the photograph loosely again, so I'm not slavishly following the photograph, but I'm trying to get an idea of where I think that hair is sitting. And also the hair would be coming down in this direction because obviously that's the direction of travel. So yes, you can be a bit creative and a bit more free with it, but try and make it so that it's still going in the direction of travel that it would be if the spaniel was sort of stood upright, or you know, in an upright position, because you want to make it look believable. So you can see that it's starting to be a lot more fluid now, and I'm starting to be a bit more creative with the lines that I'm putting on. I'm starting to go in different directions, and I'm starting to cover some of the areas that we've got these little sort of blocky bits out. So we will go in again and we'll refine and make sure that, you know, we're really happy with all of these areas. But this is, and you can see how I'm moving the pencil. So I'm not holding the pencil right at the end. I've got a really loose grip on the pencil. I'm letting the pencil very much do a lot of the work, so I'm not pressing on or anything like that. I'm just letting the pencil really sort of find its own way around. And in my head I'm trying to feel what fur would feel like if I was stroking this dog. What would it feel like? How soft would it feel? So it informs that kind of intuitiveness of when you're working on this fur. I'm going to go in and do a little bit of work on the eye, just to refine the area around the eye. And this is what sort of brings everything together, really, is kind of that cohesiveness that you're looking for. You're building those layers to using the same colours in the fur, so it sort of starts to build that cohesiveness. And obviously the hair on this dog's face is so much shorter than the ear fur. So when you're doing the strokes, be really mindful of that, and really mindful of the little strokes that you're kind of putting on there, because you want, you know, fur is different. It's very different on different parts of the body. So understanding how that fur sits on the face, and you know, those little hairs that you're picking out, just little hints of detail. And obviously if this was an older dog, then probably have a lot of grey hair around its muzzle, and a few, you know, lighter hairs here and there. So fur is never ever just one colour, it's multiple colours, and the more you do this, the more you will see colour. You'll see it in everything, and actually that's one of the wonderful things about art, is that the more you do, the more you see colour in everything. You know, even if you're sat in the car and you're kind of waiting in a traffic jam, you'll see beautiful colours in trees and clouds and sky and all of those things. And especially if you sat there thinking, how would I paint that? It makes life, it enriches life in a way that I think it is very special if you're an artist. So I feel very privileged to be an artist, to have that experience of life, which I think is different to people who don't paint. I think the world is not as vibrant perhaps to people who don't paint. So the more you do this, the more you'll see, and the more it will definitely enrich your life, definitely. I know when I look at my own dog, even when she's just sat on my knee, I'm just looking at her and thinking, God, you know, the most beautiful colours in her fur, you know, colours like purples and blues and all sorts of things that you wouldn't expect to see in just a black dog. But depending on the lighting and where she is. So now, because I've done this area here, I can start to do some of these really messy bits of hair that just kind of stick out and wave into that. And I'm just going to pat them down a bit so they don't look quite so sharp. And I'm just going to do a few wavy squiggly bits because this hair up here looks a little bit too contrived still, so I'm trying to again soften it down, soften it. And then I'm going to go in with this nice sand colour to just push back some of these areas here. And again, I'll give you the list of the colours that I've used in this, but don't get too hung up on the colours. Use what you've got. You just need a range of a mid, a dark and a light tone really to, you could do it in black and white even, if you have, you know, grey and a black and a white, because and sometimes just doing it in black and white is actually more effective because you're not concentrating then on the colour, you're concentrating on the tonal values of things. So sometimes just drawing in black and white is in itself a really good exercise to do. So I'm just fiddling around with these areas now. I'm trying to bring in some of these highlights, and I'm going to go in with a bit more darker areas again. So I'm going to use this darker brown in certain places, not too much, just to pick out some of these darker areas. And I'm going to go over, do some more of these. So you can see that I'm not drawing accurately, but I am giving an impression of a very, very hairy and fluid ear. And this is one of those things that you could carry on. You could go on and on and on doing more and more to this. That's the beauty of your work as you develop, because the more you do, the more you'll see, the more you'll want to refine various areas and to sort of learn about what effects you can get. So I'm just going in with a bit of the pan pastel to just soften some of these areas so that I'm pulling out some of these shadow areas in a bit more detail, and trying to sort of warm it up a little bit in areas where I feel it's a bit pale, I suppose. So I just want to warm it up a little bit in some of those areas. So I'm just going to go over and I'm just going to push some of that pigment in again. So we're coming towards the final refinement layer now. Okay, so I'm just going to put in a bit of white in some of these areas now. So I want some of these areas to really catch the highlights really brightly. So I'm going to be quite careful in not putting too much white on there, because obviously the fur isn't white, and I'm just going to do the occasional sort of hair can see that the tooth of the paper now is quite full, so we're going to be quite careful in what we put on there now. So just a few. And then I can go back over. And I think it's important as well to not go over the top with the guide hairs. You want that in the area that you want your focus of interest, really. Otherwise it just looks a bit sort of mishmashy and a bit too much. So I tend to keep this more muted around this side here. Now if I was doing this in a sort of a pet portrait, I would probably come back and I would probably do a lot more refinement on this at a later stage when the portrait is nearing the finishing area, because very often if you do the ear and then you move on, you want it to look cohesive with the rest of the portrait. So sometimes I will leave it in a state where I think I finished it, and then I'll go back and think actually I could do some more work on that. So only you know when you're happy with something. When is a piece of work finished? It's a hard one, isn't it? It's when you don't feel that you can add any more to it. I think that you can overdo a painting, so I think it's better to leave it before you've overworked it, rather than to do too much and then ruin it. And sometimes a hint of something is better than refining everything to the nth degree. So I think that sometimes less is more, definitely, I would say. So I would just, you know, and if you're not sure, walk away and have a look at it with a fresh pair of eyes, because that's when the real sort of value is added to a painting. I think sometimes just walking away, and I've seen paintings when I've walked away and I've thought I'd finish them, and then I walk away and I see something that's quite clearly I could have had value by doing that, but at the time it wasn't as evident. So, you know, it's always valuable to walk away and see where it takes you. So I'm just refining the areas around this eye now, blending in little black guide hairs around the eye to make it look a bit more realistic, and then a tiny bit of shadow there. There's a bit of light there. And there you have it. So I'll just do a bit more down this bit here, I think, just to so you can see, you can just, you know, you can just carry on and carry on, but don't do too much. And yeah, as I say, with pastel, it is a very forgiving medium. You can put a lot of layers down, so you can really, you know, keep going back. And I would say one of the things that I would do as well is, if you feel that you put too much pigment down and that you feel like you want to rein back a little bit, but you're not quite sure how to, there are ways of doing that. So one of the ways that I would do that, if I thought I put too much pigment down and I thought you know, it was a bit thick in areas and I wanted to put a bit more detail on it, if you get a bit of masking tape and you just really low tack masking tape, like this blue tack masking tape that I get here, and just put that over the top and just keep pulling it, it pulls out the pigment off the paper. It doesn't get rid of all of it, and then you can go over it with a putty eraser, and you won't ever, I would say you won't get back to the level of paper surface that you started with, but certainly it will give you a surface that you could then rework and add some colour to. So there are things that you can do with pastel mat. As I say, pastel mat is a very, very forgiving surface, and that's why it's one of my favourite papers to work on, because it has such a lot of, it's very versatile, especially with pastels. It's very hard to erase on pastel mats, so you'll never get rid of your lines entirely. So you know, as long as you're going to cover up what you're trying to erase, then you'll be all right with that, and you'll be able to get away with that. So there we go, one spaniel's ear. I hope you've enjoyed it. Take care.